Good morning. We are glad that you are here. If you are new, welcome. There is a place for you here.
At Woods Chapel Church, we are one church with 3 different campuses.
In Lee Summit,
in Raytown,
And here in Blue Springs.
We are a group of people doing our best to love God and those around us.
Our vision is to build transforming communities where everyone is included, accepted, and loved.
All of us are on a journey.
This is a place where you can ask difficult questions about faith and life.
We are here to help and support each other.
Thanks for joining us.
No matter who you are or where you're from, we want you to know that you are welcome.
Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Abby and I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning. We want to hear from you, so let us know where you're watching from, how your 4th was, and if you're new, type the word new so we know you're here. But let's begin this morning in prayer. Father God, we just come to you today giving thanks. Thank you so much for your love and your mercy, and thank you for extending your grace to us. God, we thank you for this time that we get to be together. While it may not be in person, we know that we don't have to be in a church to worship you, God, that we can be anywhere to worship and praise your name. And we're overjoyed to do that this morning, God. God, I just ask that you can be with all of us this morning, especially those who are struggling. God, wrap your arms around them. Let them feel your peace and your presence. God, help us to keep our eyes on you. We know that you are our light, and that if we always keep our eyes on you, we can walk through anything. God, you are our hope, and we thank you for that. God, we thank you for loving us, that in this huge world that you care about each and every one of us, and you welcome us with open arms. We love you so much, and it's all in your name. Amen. That the highest King would welcome me. I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me.
Good morning. My name is Michael Scott, and I'm the pastor here at Woods Chapel Blue Springs, and I want to thank you for joining us this morning. Now, we've been on a journey for the past 4 to 5 weeks talking about chaos in our communities. And we specifically been talking about how we can take this chaotic situation we find ourselves in with race and race relations, and how we can take those chaotic encounters and we can turn them back into community. And so I want to invite you to have conversations, to post here on this live feed, to talk about things that you have seen in our communities that have brought us back together. Because I think we find ourselves in a lot of chaos right now. And so each week I've told a story about something that I've seen that has been beautiful. And this week has been no different. On Wednesdays, we have a small group that is studying the book called White Fragility. And a lot of you are a part of that. And for about an hour and a half on Wednesday from 6:30 to 8, we've read the book and we've been discussing the different chapters. And this last week in our discussions, we were talking about how this can't be something that we do just right now. That we have to be in this for the long haul. And it seems like, or it appears at least, people have been talking about this. People have been trying to heal these relations for decades and even centuries. And so I think I made the statement that anytime somebody comes to me and says, I can help you do this. So let's take weight loss, for example. I can help you to lose weight just by doing these 3 things, boom, boom, boom. Or I can help you be successful at this just by doing these 3 things, boom, boom, boom. Now, even though I sometimes use similar language. Now, when I use language like that, I invite you into something. And I believe there are steps that we can take. And as long as we are on a path, as long as we are headed in a direction, that's good. But this issue with race and racism there aren't just 3 simple steps we can take. Now, we need to be taking steps towards healing and towards reconciliation and back towards each other in community. But it's not just 3 steps. We can't just do 3 things or 1 thing or even a list of things and be done. This is something that we have to be in this for the long term, for the long haul. And I want to discuss that today, that this isn't going to be something that just goes away. Woods Chapel Blue Springs is going to be a church that is going to continue to educate and to talk about how we repair race relations in our community. And so each week we've been kind of taking it down and breaking this apart into different sections. And I specifically have been using Genesis for most of this series just to make a point that Genesis just means beginning, right? That even in the history, in our beginnings, there's so many chaotic stories and so many ways in which we came back together. So week 1, I actually started with Jesus, and I talked about, although Jesus isn't in Genesis, I talked about how Jesus fought racism. And we talked about the ways and the racism, the people who were from Samaria at the time, the Samaritans, and how they were thought of as less than. And how Jesus takes the Samaritans and he lifts them up and he makes them the heroes of his stories. Jesus addressed racism. And then the second week we talked about at the very beginning of Genesis, even in creation, our history is chaotic. The earth was this shapeless, chaotic mass. And then out of that, God creates, and out of that comes this beautiful thing we call the Garden of Eden, paradise. And each week we've been talking to friends of mine, people of color, specifically black people right now. And we've been hearing their stories and listening to their stories about how they have been influenced and shaped by our cultures and communities and how racism has affected them. And each week we talked about, here's something that we can do. And it's not just one thing that we do one time. It's something that we're going to do repeatedly over and over again. And so we talk about how ways in which we can combat or fight systemic racism. So decisions we can make in our lives to change not only the circumstance of those around us, but that will grow and impact everybody, not just in the United States, but hopefully throughout the world. And so week 3, we talked about how life is difficult. This is not an easy thing to do. In Genesis, God asks Abram and Sarai to change their names to Abraham and Sarah. And he makes this covenant with Abraham and all his descendants where all the males had to be circumcised, right? Circumcision is this idea that we cut out something of our lives to make us better people. And of course, circumcision would go less from a concrete idea and more to an abstract idea. That there are things within us that we need to look at ourselves and say, there are things in which we can make better. And then make those decisions. And that they are hard and difficult. Our fourth week, we talked about how we didn't start this necessarily. I believe that everybody plays a role in racism, but we didn't start this. But we find that racism exists much like the tension between our Islam brothers and sisters and the Jewish and Christianity faith. There's conflict because Hagar and Ishmael were kicked out of Abraham and Sarah's family. And from their lineage, we find the religion of Islam and we find Muslims. And that to this day, specifically in the Middle East, but it goes beyond that, there are wars that are fought over this one event that happened in Genesis in the Old Testament. And the same is similar with our race relations. Maybe we didn't start this, but it exists today, and it is our job to make sure that we resolve it or to take steps towards fixing it. Last week, we talked about this task seems impossible, and I interviewed my new boss, David Gilmore, where we talked about seeing each other. And by seeing each other, what he said was that when we see each other, that you should see yourself in the other person. He says it's when we see self in somebody else that we can truly have empathy and love and appreciation for that individual. And the way before that, my friend Lucas said that we need to be willing to be wrong. Of course, these are all ideas to open us up, to stretch us, to push us, to make us uncomfortable so that we can make change. Today, there's no difference from where I've been reading. I'm going to read from Genesis like I have every other week. And so we started at creation. We went to Abraham and Sarah. Last week we talked about Isaac and how Abraham, this task seems daunting, but Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac. And sometimes it feels like God is asking something impossible from us. But of course, Isaac would live. Isaac would go on to have Jacob. And Jacob would grow up, and at some point he would get his father's blessing. Actually, he would steal from his brother, because his brother Esau was older than him. He would do something dishonest, and he would steal Esau's birthright, and he would steal Esau's blessing. But Isaac is kind of, he leaves because he's fearful of his life. And Isaac sends Jacob to his uncle, Laban, and tells him that he's going to marry one of Laban's daughters. Now, I just want to be upfront. Yes, that's he ends up marrying his cousin. Actually, he marries two of his cousins. And so you're going to hear that in the story. And I want you to be able to see beyond that. When we read Genesis and a lot of the Bible, these are stories that we can learn from. I mean, there's also a part we're going to read today where it talks of women as property. And of course, we don't believe that. So out of the gate, before we read this story, I want you to hear from me that when we read these, that we're looking for something more than just the words, that we're looking for a concept here, for an idea, something that we can learn from that speaks to us that we still struggle with today. And I'm going to need you to overlook the fact that in their day and age, women were property and they would give them away. Or the fact that Jacob marries his cousin. And so this is where we find the story. Jacob has left his father and his brother Esau out of fear of his life, and he's gone to Laban's house. And so in Genesis 29, starting with verse 16, it says this. It says, "Now Laban had two daughters." So these would have been Jacob's two cousins. "The older one was named Leah, and the younger Rachel. Leah had delicate eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and was good looking. Jacob loved Rachel and said, 'I will work for you for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter.' And Laban said, 'I'd rather give her to you than another man, so stay with me.' Jacob worked for Rachel for 7 years, but it seemed like a few days because he loved her. Jacob said to Laban, 'The time has come.' So he's worked 7 years. Like, the time's come. This has been our agreement. I want your daughter's hand in marriage. Give me my wife so that I may sleep with her.' So Laban invited all the people of that place and prepared a banquet. However, in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he slept with her. In the morning, there she was, Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, 'What have you done to me? Didn't I work for you to have Rachel? Why did you betray me?' Laban said, 'Where we live, we don't give the younger woman before the oldest. Complete the celebratory week with this woman, then I will give you the other woman too for your work, if you work for me 7 more years.' So that is what Jacob did. He completed the celebratory week with this woman, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife. Jacob slept with Rachel, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. He worked for Laban 7 more years. 14 years he works for this woman. I mean, even to begin with, to say that you would do something for 7 years to try to accomplish, to stick with the same thing with one singular goal. I find merit in that. But then to not even achieve that and to have to work twice as much, 14 years towards one common goal. What I take from this story is not that Laban was giving his daughters away as property to be married to his cousin. What I gain from the story is that this is going to take a long time. That if we truly focus on ending racism and doing our part and fighting for what we believe in, this isn't going to take 7 years. It's not going to take 14 years. This is going to take decades because we are trying to repair damage that has happened for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And what I gather from the story is that we have to be in this for the long haul. We have to be willing to make changes in our life and continue to say, maybe, just maybe I don't have all the answers. Just maybe there's something else I can learn. And just maybe there's a way that we have, and one of the ways in which we talked about this over the last few weeks, maybe there's just one thing in one of those sermons or one of those interviews that you can take and say, you know what? That pushes me a little bit. That makes me uncomfortable. And I want to know more about that. And so this week, I had a chance to interview another person. Now, this person is not a person of color. This person goes to our church. And I thought it was important that we talk about what this looks like, how this is going to change us, how this is going to shape us, and what does our church look like going forward. So take a look. Good morning, everybody. I have Kelsey Liggett with me here this morning. And Kelsey is our small groups leader. Amongst other things, Kelsey comes in and preaches, I don't know, at least, well, you were scheduled to preach 2 more times, and then, of course, COVID happened. But you've preached at least twice, is that right? Mm-hmm. In the past, and so helps out in a lot of different areas. She also leads and is a part of several other small groups. And we'll come back to her role about some new stuff that she'll be doing near the end of the interview. But I'm interviewing Kelsey this week because we've interviewed 5 different people, and we've talked about what we've listened to the stories of Black people in our community. And we started with Genesis, and I wanted to talk about how our origins and our origin stories have so much chaos in them. And after going through that, hearing people of color, their story, I wanted 2 white people to talk and to say, okay, going forward, what are we going to do? I want us to talk about how this is part of the sermon today is just about how we have to be in this for the long haul. And so specifically, because Kelsey has been so engaged, all of this sparked because the very first week we started this, if you guys follow along, Kelsey wrote me an email, and I read that email the very first week. And so I just wanted to come full circle back with Kelsey and speak with her about just some different things that are going on and what we can do about it. So Kelsey, I kind of want to turn it over to you a little bit. What have you, what is this, has this helped, do you think? Do you feel like we've learned anything? And what do people need to hear?
So, yes, I would say that this has helped. I think any conversation and acknowledging that there's things that we can do better, that we need to do better, and that there is education that needs to happen is always helpful. I mean, you can't be or do any of those things until you first acknowledge and, start having the conversations. And so, and I think the conversations were good. I think bringing in other people is really important, who have backgrounds, opinions, viewpoints that, are different than us that we can't have, is also really important. And so I think it's definitely been helpful and is definitely a really good starting place for us to move from.
Personally, how is this, even not even Sunday mornings, but the current events, how has it influenced you, and what are some things you're taking away, and what are some of the things that you're doing?
So I kind of just want to start. one of the reasons I wrote the email in the first place, and the reason the Ahmaud Arbery murder like hit so close to me, is I do live in a fairly diverse neighborhood, and there's a Black gentleman who, whenever I go outside to take a walk, he's always running through my neighborhood. And so after, the video surfaced, I was kind of like just standing outside and I saw him run by. And it was kind of that reckoning moment for me that I was like, that's Ahmaud Arbery. Like, it's that relational to us, that it's the person who lives right next door, or across the street, or the dad of someone your kids go to school with. So it just hit because it was just I saw someone else that reminded me of that situation. And so beyond listening to the conversations on Sundays, a few important pieces that I feel like I've been doing is continuing to read the news. I think that's really important to see, the ongoing conversations that are happening, the ongoing actions that are being taken in a lot of the different situations that have come to light and are being acknowledged, signing petitions, finding lists of things that we can do and things that we can act on. I've written emails and made phone calls on behalf of several different instances like the Ahmaud Arbery. And, I've been telling people there's a Surge KC group, which is a branch of a national group, and they have at least weekly conversations that you can just tune into. You can ask questions, but they talk about race. They talk about things like, white fragility, which, you're leading the group and I've joined the conversation for that. And then I think, the more simple sounding things that I've done is I've, joined Instagram pages or followed Instagram pages like Diverse Kids Books. And I've always kind of made it a mission to be inclusive for my kids as far as, like the LGBTQ community, because, my best friend is gay. And so it's always been really important to me that my kids grow up understanding and being accepting. So, but I'm furthering that by finding, books that the main characters aren't white, or maybe there's a character in a wheelchair, or like diversity spans so many things. And I feel like sometimes we don't recognize that or especially me, because I'm white, I'm straight, I'm from a middle class family. So all of the different aspects of diversity, I don't know that I would ever really look for. So finding outlets that kind of show me what that diversity looks like and what I can, exemplify to my kids has been really important to me as well.
So your kids go to our preschool at the church. And one of the things that we've ordered Dr. Kindy's, he's written a book for children, for young children. I forget what they call, playbooks, or are they called, anyway, it's some kind of interactive book, and I think it shows up this next week. And one of our goals, I talked to our We Care director, Brittany, today, that we can actually have the conversations even with kids. I mean, we take kids here, this, your kids have been here since they were babies. And so having those conversations and finding a way, even from birth, to start having these conversations. So I'm really excited about that. What are some positive things that you've seen? So often I think when we read the news or we watch media, we get a lot of negative. I also want to be aware that we hopefully are at least heading on a path of some kind of path of progress. And so what positive things have you seen going on?
I mean, I think the most obvious and probably the most important too, positive, is the conversations that have stemmed from everything. Like I said, for a lot of white people, myself included, like I said, it's hard to know what you don't know and what you don't experience. And so even if, we knew that racism existed, it's another thing to then find out and acknowledge in all the ways that racism permeates through every avenue of our lives. And so I've been really inspired by, the conversations that people are having, the vulnerabilities that people are willing to share. I mentioned in that email that Brene Brown talks about how you can't have the tough conversations without being willing to be vulnerable. And I think that all of us that are like, okay, like, what do I need to know? Asking questions, even from a frame of reference that might be ignorant, that might be insensitive almost because we don't know what we're getting into, being willing to have that vulnerability and being corrected and being educated. I think that's a huge positive. I would say that another huge positive is, hearing about all of the instances of, right now, Black people being murdered is not positive. I would say that all of the action that I've seen that people are trying to take to rectify that would be a positive. I've seen more people signing petitions, donating. I've seen more people talking about putting money into Black-owned businesses or, voting than I have in a really long time. And so if we can continue to build on that, then that could be a significant positive, I think.
Speaking of Black-owned businesses, I had somebody ask me the other day, somebody was saying, I own a white business. Why would I encourage somebody to go somewhere else? And I think we talked a little bit about this in our small group in white fragility. When we spend our money other places, so traditionally white people have had wealth transfer from generation to generation. And if you look at statistics, something like 80 some odd percent or 70 some odd percent of our wealth is in real estate. And of course, the Black community has not had the same lending practices or opportunities to buy real estate, and therefore do not have the same amount of wealth as we do. And I think it's important that with wealth comes power. I mean, with money comes power. That's just part of the deal. And if you read the White Fragility book, she gives the statistics for the amount of wealth, and it's all white men that have most of the wealth in the world, not just in America, in the world. And when we say we want to support Black businesses, what we're really saying is we're willing to part with it's one of the ways we can part with some of our wealth and specifically support so that the Black business owners in our community can be successful. And in essence, we're just a small part, we're transferring power from us to them. And so I just wanted to say that because I think I've had that question several times over the last several weeks of the why.
For me too, I would like everyone, as they listen, to think how many times in the last week they've ordered off of Amazon. I mean, really? Right, sorry.
Okay, it's part of the gig.
Diesel. To think of how many times in a week we've ordered off of Amazon. Okay, you're supporting a quadrillionaire,
right.
Genuinely. So it's not about taking even from other small business owners, white small business owners. It's reallocating our money to other small business owners, in this case, Black or minority small business owners. If you're talking about getting diversity like books or flashcards or educational tools instead of going to Amazon, then you can look at Black-owned bookstores, Black-owned educational shops. I mean, for everything that you can get from this conglomerate, you can find somewhere else. There's more heart put into these products. There's more, you're investing into a community, into a family, and you're investing into, minority cultures that have long since been ignored and disenfranchised. And so for me, that question doesn't make any sense because the average person isn't spending their money that frequently at a ton of small businesses either. So I think in general, it would be a good idea for us to kind of reevaluate how we spend our funds in general.
Almost half of all retail sales are actually through Amazon. That's an alarming statistic.
Well, and I'm a culprit. It's fast. It's easy. I have Amazon Prime, which is the best thing ever. I get it.
You can't say that after telling people not to buy from them.
but that's the truth of it.
Right.
We're all we're all.
It is easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm guilty of it. The church is guilty of it. I'll be honest with you. We're guilty of it as well. You mentioned something earlier about how racism extends as we have conversations, as we talk and educate ourselves. I believe part of that, and I think you said this, is that we become aware of how prominent some of these issues are. So when we talk about those issues and how prominent and how they bleed into everything else, it reminds me of veins or fingers spreading out into everything. And when we talk about that, we're talking about systemic racism. So because there was issues or systems put in place, that has a trickle down effect, right? And it bleeds into everything else. And so as a community, as a church, you're the one who brought this up. You said we have pathways out of poverty, right? We talk about the LGBTQ plus community. We try to educate people and invite people to love one another. And you challenged me. You said, what are we doing in specifically the people of color? How are we teaming up with other churches and with other groups and with people specifically and addressing this? And so what are the things that as a church and as a community, what are some of the things that we can do? Now, I'm going to tell everybody, you have agreed going forward in the future of leading some small groups geared towards education of how we can, I'm trying to get away from combat racism because that's a negative connotation, how we can be more inclusive with race. Maybe that's a better way to say that. And so, because I never want to be against things, I want to be for things. I want to be for Black people, right? Or for people of color. And so what are some ideas you have, or what are some things that we can do since you'll be leading that charge, or you'll be one of the people that is leading people down that pathway, so that as a community church that we can continue to help people along in that journey?
Not put on the spot here or anything.
Not at all. So
last night.
I know.
I'll just say from when I got the call from Amy asking if I would do it, like my immediate thought is I would probably not read a book or anything. I think that's long and heavy and consumes too much time, but I would like to focus on, finding news stories, reading and educating ourselves at some point. And then, there has to be a component in which we talk about ways that, like I mentioned to you, we can make our spaces more inclusive. We can, maybe it's I identify an opportunity that we volunteer or work with a predominantly Black church or a predominantly Black organization or nonprofit. Maybe it's that, after we've talked about things, then we go and we sit together and listen to a surge conversation and we see what those conversations consist of. I would like to bring in resources. I would 100%, if, there are people with kids, I would bring in, resources of places where you can find diverse educational tools, books, things that I have found to be helpful. We talked small business and supporting minority business. Well, here's a list of Kansas City's small businesses that you can support so that are local. But I think a lot of it has to be self-reflection. I've said this a lot, and I'm going to continue to say this a lot, that Blue Springs is not a diverse area. And I know that's going to irritate people. They're going to go, yes, it is. But it's not a diverse area. If you look,
I can statistically prove to you that it's not.
Well, yeah. Stats don't matter to some people, but you can look at your schools, you can look at your churches, you can look at all of these things, and Blue Springs is not a diverse area. So what are we going to do to make sure that the things and the organizations that we are a part of in a non-diverse area are welcoming? Because I think that takes a lot of self-reflection. It takes a lot of conversation, because what I think is welcoming and what you think is welcoming might not be welcoming. And so I think that's a huge conversation that needs to happen is, how do we? So I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know exactly what it will be, but off the top of my head, those are areas that I think could be important for focus.
Well, just a few days ago, Scott and Lisa Foster, who head up Sleep in Heavenly Peace, if you know what organization that is. Sleep in Heavenly Peace has build days where they build beds for children in our community who can't afford them, or they're in foster care, or maybe they're graduating out of the foster care system, and they support that. So he called me and he says, I've been watching what you guys have been doing. He goes, and not all churches are talking about this. And he says, we have a Black church that we work with, and we'd be curious if you guys wanted to team up and do a build day together. And so, of course, I was like, absolutely. We also have another organization called Relatable that does something very similar with building tables. And so it is our goal, once things are safe enough to come together, where everybody feels safe enough to come together to do a build day. And of course, Scott and Lisa has been through some treatment recently and is not able to do as much as before. And so we are planning that right now. So I'm going to include you in some of those conversations. I have not talked to you about that yet, but we're excited about that. I know Amy reached out to, is it Bethel Church, that we worked with this last Christmas, and we had done a toy drive with them. And I know we've reached out to them to talk and see some things we can do. So I'm excited about what the future holds. I've told you, I've told Amy, I've told Allison, Abby, everybody, this is not going to be something we just talk about for 5 weeks and then we're done. Like this is one of our pathways, one of, I would say there's probably 3 to 4 pathways that we talk about. Pathway of, I want to grow deeper in my faith, pathway out of poverty to help people with that, pathway of being inclusive. Really the pathway of inclusivity includes LGBTQ. We still have a long ways to go with women. I mean, for being honest, women are not treated the same as men are still in our culture. They're not paid this, that. And then with minorities. And so when I talk about that pathway, I'm trying to be more inclusive my focus has been a lot on the LGBTQ community and not as much on race or on women. And I think we need to be more intentional with having a clear pathway of educating people and helping people along that journey, because it's not an easy one. I mean, I come from a background that was painful at the beginning, but I had good people who were patient with me, who loved me through it. And they didn't allow me to be sexist or racist or homophobic. They would interject, but they still loved me through it. Like they didn't discount me. They didn't kick me out. They didn't say, I'm done with you. They continue to have conversations with me. And I want to be a church that does that we're inclusive, but at the same time, those who are struggling with this, I want to be a group of people. We're not going to tolerate any kind of hate, but I want to welcome people on a journey, regardless of where they find themselves on that path. And so,
I think that's we kind of talked about this the other night, but I think that's an important piece, is that we live in a culture that very easily writes people off. If you don't believe this, then you're done. If you don't believe this, you're canceled. Not my friend. Even family, we're just writing off because we have disagreements, because people aren't ready to accept and become educated. And while I agree that there's a significant difference between literal hate speech or hate actions and, ignorance and, not being at a point yet where you're ready to, examine and self-reflect. And so I think that a critical piece of this is that we love people through it. We love people who do not agree with us, who don't see it, and you keep loving them until they're ready, open, and receptive to the conversation. I think that's really important for people to keep in mind as we continue down this path, that, we're not all at the same place. We don't all have the same experiences, and that goes, for everyone. And so we all have to be very, willing to love people.
And that therein lies the challenge. Right? Yeah. All right, Kelsey, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to say to anybody or to people that you want them to hear?
I don't think so.
Right. Well, I appreciate your time. Looking forward to the next adventure, and let's pray. God, thank you for Kelsey. Thank you for her voice. Thank you for her strength, and thank you for her willingness to help people to learn. God, I want to pray as we move forward as a community and as individuals. God, may you help us to see the immense and great need that is all around us and all the hurt that's happening right now. God, help us to want to heal that pain and want to make a difference, because God, I believe it starts there. And from there, God, I believe we can have healthy conversations and we can learn about one another. And we can see each other the way that you see us. God, help us to stand up against racism and in support of our brothers and sisters of color. And God, as we do that, I ask that you bless those efforts and all the things that we do. And we pray these things in your name. Amen.
Build your kingdom here, let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand, heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire, win this nation back. Change the atmosphere.
As we wrap up this series, I want to thank Kelsey, I want to thank Clarence, I want to thank Chloe, I want to thank Danica, I want to thank Lucas, and I want to thank David for taking their time to help stretch us, to help us to understand what's happening around us, to share their experiences so that we can relate, so hopefully that we can look at that and look at our lives and say that we can make change. So today I simply challenge you. I challenge you to educate yourself, to maybe learn something that you haven't previously learned or even thought about or even explored. To do that. And if that interests you, if that's something you want to do, please reach out to Kelsey and she can help you with that. So go, have a blessed day, see the good, and go in peace.